Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told how to voice radio, so today I am going to be showing you how we might be able to use an underappreciated Pokemon. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about Glalie. Now, when this card was released in Breakthrough, I hyped it a little bit on my podcast, PTCGRadio. I said it looked good. I was a fan of Glalie. And now a lovely UK chap, Jeffrey Tallman, has gone ahead and won undefeated a league challenge with Glalie. And now that it's seen a little bit of success, I figured it's time to look at how we might go about playing this video. So, starting off, let's look at the EX. 170 HP, fine. Weakness to metal, we like. As much as I like Excadrill, and as much as I really want to use Excadrill in tournaments, let's face it, he's not that playable. Now, Mega Sizzle is potentially a playable card, but that really is about it in terms of playable metal types at the moment. It is not an archetype that's seeing a huge amount of play. Now, I'm not saying nobody's playing metal. I'm just saying that other than Sizor, there are not many cards that are metal that are seeing play. Now, the first attack, flip a coin. If heads, they're paralyzed. 1 water energy. This attack isn't going to win you the game. This attack is going to buy you some time. Now, one piece of advice I always give to newer players is to look at the attacks of your Pokemon that you don't expect to use. You're not playing Glalie for Ice Breath, but Ice Breath can buy you a turn or two just to set up and do what you need to do. Not unlike using Froakie's Bubble in a Greninja deck. Instant Freeze is pretty good. Now, we like Mega EXs, but we like them more when the EX has a good attack, and I am a fan of Instant Freeze. 1 water, 2 colourless, 50 damage, but if you've got the same number of cards in hand as your opponent, you now do 150 damage. Now 150 isn't absolutely game-breaking, but it's not bad at all. Don't forget you can add a Fighting Fury bout here. Glalie will go up to 210 HP, and Instant Freeze can do 160. You add a Giovanni's, and you could be doing 180. Although, let's be perfectly honest about this, you're probably not even playing Fighting Fury bout in the deck. You're playing the Mega, you're going to want to play Spirit Link. How do you get the same number of cards as your opponent? Well, you don't have to play any extra cards in your deck way would be to just play carefully and just try and use cards or not use cards to have the same amount in your hand as your opponent. But if you want a nice cheating way, how about Judge? Judge will put both players onto 4 cards. There we go. The thing I don't like about Judge is that on turn 1, it can be a bit of a pain for you. And although it can also be really good if you judge your opponent to 4 cards while having a decent setup yourself. But the other thing is, let's say you need a double colourless energy. If you play a Judge, then you get down to 4 cards, your opponent gets 4 cards. If you draw the double colourless, you're not able to play it, because then you won't have the same number of cards in hand as your opponent. A good attack and a nice every turn attack. A nice standard trying to do 150. It's not always going to work, but sometimes it will. But the main event here is Mega Glalie EX. 220 HP and 1 attack. Again, water and a double colourless, 100 damage. But if you've got 10 or more damage counters, 100 or more damage, you do 250. That, ladies and gentlemen, is enough to KO a Wailord. That's pretty sweet. This is going to one-hit KO basically anything. Okay, Wailord with a Fighting Fury belt, no, but basically everything else is going to be one-hit KO'd by this. Now, when you've got 100 damage on, you go down to 120 HP remaining, but you're one-hit KOing everything. And this basically sets up a nice deck whereby you play Shrine of Memories, so that you can play Mega Glalie and use Glalie EX's attacks. And one of 3 things is going to happen. You don't have much damage on you. You don't have the same number of cards. You use Cryomouth to do 100 damage. You don't have 100 damage on you, but you can match the number of cards your opponent has in their hand. You get to go and do 150 damage with Instant Freeze. You do have 100 damage counters on you. Sorry, 100 damage. 100 damage counters would be 1,000 damage. That would be ludicrous. But if you've got 100 damage on you, you use Cryo Mouth for 250. And let's not forget that 100 or 150 is going to be enough to KO a lot. It's only EXs and Mega EXs you really are going to need Cryo Mouth for. And let's say you've got 100 damage on you. You get a KO with Cryo Mouth, your opponent gets a KO in return, because you're not going to have much HP left at that point. That's okay, you've got a 2-prize attack. So that's the basics of the deck, but let's look at the other cards you might wish to play with it. In terms of Pokemon, there's one that I would really recommend here, and that's Talonflame. And the reason is, you basically just want Glalie and Mega Glalie. But you need some other basics. So why don't you play Talonflame? Talonflame, we've seen, you saw it in my Garchomp list that I posted recently. In fact, it was the last video I posted. And quite frankly, this helps. You get to have a nice starter with 130 HP and free retreat and a nice attack Aero Ball that allows you to search for any 2 cards in your deck. And then you can get set up. Maybe you go Spirit Link Mega Glalie, maybe you search DCE, you can do whatever you want. You don't need other Pokemon. This isn't a deck where you really want to tech like that, so why don't you just play 4 Talonflame, and then you've got, unless you start with more than one basic, you've got a 50-50 chance of starting with Talonflame. And when you don't start with Talonflame, you're starting with Glalie. I can live with that, ladies and gentlemen. I can live with that. Now, the other card which I would recommend playing strictly as a one-off is Manaphy. Manaphy EX, of course, from Breakpoint. Manaphy has the ability Aqua Tube. You're going to be playing Water Energy and double colorless. It means that you're going to be able to give free retreat. Smash with Glalie, about to get KO'd, retreat into a new one. And you can even combo this nicely with Rough Seas, where you retreat one Glalie, sit there and heal with Rough Seas, removing 30 damage per turn, getting ready to go up with the next one. Although, of course, if you are playing Rough Seas, that is going to make Shrine of Memories a little bit awkward. Now, there are a couple of other Pokemon that you could play with this, although I'm less inclined to do so. Firstly, Glaceon EX. If you want a slightly techier build, Glaceon EX is pretty good. Crystal Ray, during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from evolved Pokemon. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. You get to get immunity from evolved Pokemon. Now, of course, if your opponent plays a Pokemon Ranger, that will turn off the effect of Crystal Ray and it's now useless. But they've still got to play Ranger, and they've got to find Ranger. If you're worried about evolved Pokemon, you can go Glaceon. One thing we're going to mention at the end of the video is that Mega Rayquaza is an horrific matchup for this deck. Well, you know what? Mega Rayquaza is an evolved Pokemon. So Glaceon EX can sit there and laugh in Rayquaza's face. Until he plays a Pokemon Ranger, of course. In which case, bad news bears. You could also, this was one of my early ideas for this deck, which I did go away from, but I still think it's worth noting, just as a footnote, Vileplume. And the reason I like Vileplume in this deck is because it's a simple deck. You need free energy on your Glalie, and you need a Shrine of Memories in play, and off you go. Now, Vileplume is going to want Forest of Giant Plants, and we're into that stadium business again. But if you can train a lot your opponent while sitting there with Glalie, it's going to go very, very nicely indeed. If you can, let's say you're playing Judge to use Glalie EX's attack, they're trainer locked, you judge them down to 4 cards, they're still trainer locked, and you just keep hitting for 150 a turn. Now, make no mistake about it, I don't think the Vileplume version of the deck is the best. I think it's a bit too clunky, and I don't think it'll work brilliantly. But in this video, I'm talking about Glalie as a whole, not just one version of the deck, so I think it's worth mentioning just as an alternative. Now, a card which you could play in this deck, which you would usually play, is Hooper. Now, Hooper, obviously, is very, very good because it can search for your Glalies and your Mega Glalies. But every Hooper you play is a terrible, terrible starter. If you start with Hooper, it's got a retreat cost of 2, and you can't use the ability. And let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, you really, 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 really want to start with Talonflame in this deck. Adding another basic is just adding in games where you don't get to start with Talonflame. If you start with only a Hooper, it would have been a mulligan, and you'd get to redraw 7 cards and hope for a Talonflame, but now you've only got a Hooper in hand, you've got to start with the Hooper. This is one of the very few decks I wouldn't want to play Hooper. I mean, to put it another way, if you are playing Talonflame in your EX decks, then Hooper becomes less of a good play. Similarly, Shaman, you've kind of got to play Shaman. At least in this deck, you're playing double colourless energy, so you can use Sky Return, and he's only got a retreat cost of 1. But to be clear, ladies and gentlemen, you've got to play Shaman. You don't have to play Hooper. Now, in terms of item cards here, there you have got Max Elixir, and Max Elixir is good. But Max Elixir only goes onto your basic Pokemon, so I'd go for Mega Turbo here. And I mention these in a lot of videos, especially Mega Pokemon videos. These are the 2 ways to accelerate energy. Generally with Mega decks, my rule would be that Mega Turbo is better. You can use it at any point in the game. If you're relying on Mega Pokemon, then you really want to be using Mega Turbo, because your aim is to evolve as fast as you possibly can. That is the goal, ladies and gentlemen. That is the goal. You could also potentially combo this with Max Potion. Heal off all of the damage and then just get your basic energy back with Mega Turbo. Now, I know that this Glalie deck is one where you don't necessarily want to heal all the time, but you don't want to be KO'd. Using the big attack here, doing 250 damage is nice, but you want to use this attack as sparingly as possible. And the odd Max Potion is not going to be something that makes you particularly sad. Again, it's probably not something I'd put in my list, but it is something I think you should consider when playing this deck. And the last thing I want to really look at in terms of cards to play here, because I really do think this is a deck that works with simplicity, is stadiums. And I think there's about 4 different stadiums you might want to play here. We've got Silent Lab. Silent Lab will slow your opponent down. Silent Lab will turn off their Hoopers, turn off their Shaman, indeed any basic Pokemon will not have an ability. Obviously, if you're playing Silent Lab, you're not going to want to play your Manaphy. I understand that. However, it could slow your opponent down enough to get set up. And again, this is not the slowest deck in the world. You're talking 1 basic, 1 special energy, and essentially a stage 1 with a Spirit Link. Bear in mind, if you play the Vileplume list, you're not going to be able to get your Spirit Links out very often at all. And I like Silent Lab, but I'm not sure it's as good as the other stadiums. It's an option, though. One weird tech, and I don't really expect anyone to play this, but one fun little tech I like in this deck is Faded Town. And Faded Town will do 2 things. Number 1, it does extra damage to your opponent's Mega Pokemon, making them easier to KO. But it also does extra damage to your Mega Glalie. Most of the time, you don't want to do extra damage. But what you can do is put a Faded Town in play. To do extra damage, it does 2 damage to each Mega Pokemon between turns, so that you can actually put more damage on Mega Glalie, so that you add up to over 100 damage on Mega Glalie, but not a KO, and then you come in doing 250 damage. I think this is a very risky play, but I think this is a fun play. Being able to go ahead and do 250 damage with Cryo Mouth because you've put Faded Town in play, you know that when that works, it's going to be beautiful. You can also use Rough Seas, which is kind of the opposite of Faded Town. You're a water Pokemon, you've got Manaphy for free retreat. Why wouldn't you play Rough Seas and heal 30 damage between turns? Well, firstly, it might actually take you out of Cryomouth range. You might end up using Rough Seas and healing, but then again, Rough Seas is not an automatic one. So what you can do is heal, but if you've got, say, 110 or 120 or 100 damage, then you don't use Rough Seas, so that you stay on 100 damage and you get to use the big attack. Again, I think this could be a fun little stadium card, but I laid out my opinion on this quite early. Shrine of Memories, in my opinion, is the best stadium for this deck. All the other 4, Silent Lab, Faded Town, Rough Seas, all of these could be, I suppose Forest of Giant Plants for Vileplume would also be a potential, but like I've said, too clunky. Really here, Shrine of Memories is the one I'd recommend, because between the 2 attacks, for Glalie and Mega Glalie, I think you'll cover yourself quite nicely. I am a fan of Shrine of Memories here. Biggest problem with this deck is let's look at the matchups for the two presumptive best decks in the format. Against Mega Rayquaza, this is going to be rough. Now, to be fair, they are going to need Skyfield and a full bench of 8 Pokemon to get a one-hit KO here. They're going to need to do 240. A bench of 7 and hitting for 210 will not be enough. But sooner or later, they are going to be able to do this, and you're not one-hit KOing them. Best case scenario, and I mean best case scenario, you're going to be using Cryomouth and Glalie X's attack instant freeze with the same number of cards to do 250. Because if you can't match cards one turn, you're not even 2-hit KOing a Mega Rayquaza, and that's a problem. Mega Mewtwo, similarly, I'm not a huge fan. Mega Mewtwo is going to try and use damage change, and if you don't one-hit KO them, and let's face it, you're not going to, you're going to lose. Here's the deal. You can only one-hit KO them if you've got 10 damage counters on you or more. And Mewtwo is a good Mewtwo player, is not going to put 10 damage counters on you. They are going to add up energy on Mega Mewtwo until they can one-hit KO with Psychic Infinity. They are not going to Psychic Infinity and not one-hit KO. You can only one-hit KO if they do 100 damage and don't one-hit KO, and they are never going to do that if they're a good player. Now you can try and paralyze them for a few turns, and you can do 100 damage or 150 every turn and hope they don't damage change, but that is unlikely. The fact that it's got bad matchups against two of maybe the best decks in the format do leave this as a metagame call. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, there will be some tournaments where this is beautiful. I told you about the chap who did well with this at a league challenge. He was expecting a Volcanion heavy metagame. He played 2 Volcanions during the league challenge. He decimated them. If you're expecting Rayquaza and you are expecting to be playing against stuff like Mewtwo, maybe this isn't the best. Although he did beat a Mewtwo in that tournament as well. But if you're expecting things like Volcanion and decks that cannot one-hit KO Mega Glalie, now we're rolling. If they can't one-hit KO you, you have got a chance. Now, you know the deal, ladies and gentlemen. There is a comment section. What do you think about Mega Glalie? I want to know. I really do. Do you have a list that you would like to share? Good news. The comment section will allow you to do so. There is a like button. Click it. It will make me happy. There is a subscribe button. Click it. It will make me happy. And, of course, you can find me, as always, on Twitter, @TheWassy. And if you've not followed me yet, why do you hate me? As always, by far the most important thing is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.